Well, as long as we are already living down under the sea talking about Moby Dick, I think you better take us to Bikini Bottom, Mike, and tell us what's going on with SpongeBob and the Krusty Krab.
I'll happily do that. So,
yes.
Lest readers think I only blog about and focus on cartoons and other things.
Don't let him tell you otherwise. Of course, that's all the blog's about.
Well, it is one. It is one particular area I look for IP lessons, and in fact, this case involving SpongeBob is a good one. It deals with trademark protection for fictional places. For those of our listeners that may not be familiar with SpongeBob, SpongeBob is this animation series that's been playing on the Nickelodeon channel going back to the 1990s. And Bikini Bottom is the fictional place where SpongeBob and his cast of characters get into all sorts of trouble and mischief. There is a restaurant called the Krusty Krab. It's one of the watering holes or greasy spoons there in Bikini Bottom. And it's a fictional place, obviously. There's no such place here on dry land where the Krusty Krab restaurant is operating. So an enterprising company decided back in 2000, I think it was 14 or 15, decided they wanted to open a restaurant here on dry land called the Krusty Krab. And Nickelodeon, who owns a series of copyrights and trademarks associated with the SpongeBob series, was not happy about that and sued under various legal theories, including a trademark infringement theory that, hey, company, you can't open the Krusty Krab restaurant because people will associate that with the SpongeBob series and with Nickelodeon. They'll think that we are somehow authorizing or sponsoring or approving of that particular business. So ultimately, there was a lawsuit that was filed over the Krusty Krab restaurant, and the application that was filed by this company, they moved for summary judgment. Nickelodeon did, and ultimately got it. And the court said that there was no right for this company to use the Krusty Krab restaurant name because it is a staple from the series SpongeBob. Consumers are likely to know of and be familiar with this fictional restaurant down under. And even though Nickelodeon has never opened a restaurant with the name Krusty Krab and served Krabby Patties or other fare, that did not preclude Nickelodeon from claiming trademark rights associated with the name. So
right, that's the really interesting twist to this case, this decision, this case. I think is that, as you write, Viacom doesn't have a trademark registration for Krusty Krab with a K, and certainly doesn't have one in the area of commerce involved here. As you said, they don't operate Krusty Krab restaurants. So the fact that the court was able to protect it anyway, I found pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that was essentially the defendant's argument that, look, we only have trademark rights associated with actual use in commerce of that mark on the goods or services that you're trying to protect. And Viacom, I think I said Nickelodeon before, but Viacom has not actually operated a restaurant. So on the surface, it's not a bad argument. But when you drill down and look a little deeper, the court really had no trouble finding that, well, people will still, it's such an iconic place, and consumers for the last 15, 20 years have come to know the Krusty Krab associated with this series on Nickelodeon. People are going to think that there is a connection or affiliation or association between these two companies. So
was there an issue in the case? Sorry, I was just wondering if just the name was involved or if logos were involved too.
That I don't know. The Krusty Krab, the word mark, I know there was an application that was submitted to the Patent and Trademark Office. And I think it actually, I could be wrong on this, I think it actually went through. It was initially approved, I believe, but then ultimately that's going to be stopped here by this court decision, assuming it's upheld assuming there's an appeal, I assume it will ultimately be upheld. So.
Right. And then
there
you
was
point
one
out
other,
that there were other cases where Kryptonite and Daily Planet were tried to be appropriated and used for purposes in the real world outside of the Superman universe. And that didn't fly because they were quote unquote staples of the Superman character and story.
Exactly. So that same rationale applies here to the Krusty Krab. It's a staple of the SpongeBob series. Millions and millions of people are familiar with it. There's not only been the series, but there's been 2 feature films featuring the Krusty Krab restaurant. So there you go. Trademark protection for fictional places. It's a good lesson and an interesting one.
Right. Sarah, would you go have lunch at the Krusty Krab if it were around the corner from you in the real world?
I probably would, and I wouldn't even know that. I would not know the reference, I have to admit.
No. Just
my son probably would, but yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say that to me, there's something a little bit troubling about the thought that you can kind of extend copyright protection in this way. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, right? Is obviously copyrighted works can then find ways of having perpetual protection over particular elements within your story. On the other hand, I was convinced, Mike, by your piece. I didn't realize actually that you wrote it until we started talking. But as I read it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Especially, I mean, to me, it all comes down to the confusion issue. I guess I don't know that I am 100% certain, but it seems at least possible that for people unlike me who know the reference might actually think that the restaurant was affiliated with Viacom. On the other, I mean, I can also see if you said to me that they wouldn't be confused, I could also be persuaded because they might associate or it might trigger in their minds, oh, SpongeBob, that's funny. I don't know that they would necessarily think that that Viacom owned the restaurant, actually. But to me, that's what it all comes down to, right? Is whether or not people would actually be confused about the source of the restaurant.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And there was, as I think I mentioned in the piece, there was consumer survey evidence that was presented by Viacom showing that I want to say about 30% of the respondents that were surveyed believed that it came from Viacom. Now, most likely, the survey didn't ask if people associate this with Viacom. What people probably said in the survey answers is that they associate it with SpongeBob or the makers of SpongeBob. People wouldn't necessarily associate it with Viacom itself. Rather, they associate the name Krusty Krab with a single source, i.e. the producers of the SpongeBob series.
Interesting.
Sarah raises a good point about copyright, Mike. How was this not a copyright infringement case by Viacom, since it's really the character of the Krusty Krab restaurant that they own?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, we've talked before about the Batmobile case that that there was copyright protection associated with the Batmobile, the Ninth Circuit told us a year or so ago. I suspect that maybe the copyright aspect wasn't as involved here, if at all, because we really are just dealing with the name of the restaurant and not necessarily the physical attributes of it.
Right.
And copyright doesn't protect names and titles. That would really fall within the domain of trademarks.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And the way that the whole thing got teed up was the fact that a service mark application was filed by the people who wanted to operate a real world Krusty Krab restaurant. So it sort of came into being in the real world in the trademark arena, and Viacom's probable first priority was to make sure that trademark didn't fly. Sarah, did you have final thoughts about Krabby Patties or anything else?
Okay. The only thing I was going to say in response to Mike was, to me, the way that the survey was worded would be really interesting. Or that would have been the thing I really honed in on if I were whoever owned the restaurant here. Because if it's just a matter of, do you associate the phrase Krusty Krab with SpongeBob? Like, that's not really the trademark question. Hopefully it was more specific that, would you think that this Krusty Krab restaurant was officially associated with the people that created SpongeBob, or something to that effect? Obviously they wouldn't have to know that Viacom owned SpongeBob as a property, but making the connection that there would be actual confusion about who owned the restaurant, not just the fact that they understand that the reference came from there, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. How the survey would typically be worded, it wouldn't actually ask consumers to associate the name of the restaurant with SpongeBob in the survey question. That would be considered a very leading question and creating biased results. What would typically happen is you would design the survey question to say, do you associate or affiliate this restaurant name with another company? And if people say yes, then you ask a follow-up question, which company or companies, and you'd probably get a variety of different answers, many of which are going to be, the SpongeBob people, or the company that makes SpongeBob, or something to that effect. And from that, you can extrapolate that people associate it with a single source, i.e. the SpongeBob people.
Oh, I love this. Beatmaster points out in IRC that Duff beer has become a real thing, even though it started out as a fictional beer in The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah, great point.
Yeah. Let's see, I'm pulling up the Wikipedia page. Started as a fictional beverage on The Simpsons. Since then, it has become a real brand of beer in a number of countries without permission or consent from its original creator, Matt Groening, and has resulted in legal battles with varying results. An official version of the beer is sold in 3 variations near the Simpsons ride at Universal Studios. So interesting that the rights holder actually decided to sell the real thing too.